Every card in Clash Royale has their own unique story. Some have very successful journeys and others have a tough time fitting in. But regardless, every card has something that makes it stand out. In this video, I'll be covering one fact for each and every one. I'll try to cover more obscure facts so that hopefully you come out of this video knowing some things you didn't. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Discarding evolutions, the Skeletons card is currently the card in Clash Royale that has gone the longest without a balance change. Its last change was in June 2017, which decreased its total units from 4 to 3. The Skeleton Troops last change, however, happened all the way back in May 2016. The Bomber has been 3 Elixir for most of its life, but it never worked that well at that cost. So in September 2018, they proposed a rework that would lower his cost to 2 with a health and damage reduction. The community voted against it, so it wasn't implemented. Until March 2021, where they decided to randomly apply this rework anyway. The Goblins actually have a 1.2 second deploy time, unlike most troops which have a 1 second deploy time. The Goblin troop appears in many different cards, so nerfing the troop directly affects all of them, but since they were overpowered and needed a nerf, they changed the deploy time in January 2024, because that's one of the few ways they could nerf it without messing a bunch of other stuff up. Spear Goblin's first 2 balance changes were standardization changes. Its first significant balance change didn't come until October 2017, about 22 months after its release. On August 15, 2016, Zap was recorded being used by 98 of the top 100 players. The Knight has had its health changed more than any other troop, totaling 8. For 2 days in December 2018, archers actually had a 5.5 tile range instead of a 5 tile range like they've had before and since then. This was implemented completely by accident. Minions used to be considered a ranged troop with a 2 tile range, which was the shortest range of any ranged troop. But in July 2019, their range was lowered to 1.6 tiles, reclassifying them as a melee unit. But their attacks are still considered projectiles. These projectiles are made up of their spit, which is Dark Elixir. This is a reference to Clash of Clans, where minions require Dark Elixir to train. If you look at arrows in-game, you'll see they have a 4-tile radius, but technically they don't. The spell is actually made up of 4 1.4-tile quadrants. This was changed in 2022 with the addition of the monk, so that if arrows were used on an active monk, it would only reflect some of the arrows instead of all of them. Cannon had the largest elixir cost change in Clash Royale history. Today it only costs 3 elixir, but upon the game's release, it cost 6. A lot of buildings were 5 to 6 elixir upon the game's release, so Cannon was radically changed so that there'd be a cheap defensive building. The reason they were so expensive originally was because they were planned to have no lifetime, meaning they would sit there indefinitely until enough damage was dealt to it, so the cost was high in accordance. I think cheaper buildings that expire was definitely the right way to go. Tesla has the smallest collision radius of any building in Clash Royale at just half a tile. Most troops have a collision radius of that size, but it's unusual for a building. It makes it more difficult to attract troops, but on the plus side it's harder to hit with spells. In an April Fool's snapshot that was never available publicly, the Mortar was changed to fire Goblin Barrels instead of its regular projectile. Although we never got this in-game, we did get a version that shot Barbarians as a temporary card, and the Mortar's evolution would shoot projectiles with a single Goblin on it. Barbarians are the only card whose card icon was changed and then later got changed back. Once a card icon is changed, the old one is never seen again, but this time was the exception. Originally, the card's icon looked like this, but was changed to this in August 2022 for the Clash from the past season. It was changed back once the season was finished. Before or since then, no card's icon has ever been changed for just a single season. All buildings lose health every second, but the Tombstone loses the least amount of hit points per second for any building, except for maybe a cloned cannon card. The Musketeer wears a cape in her card icon and render, yet she's never seen with one in battle. Weirdly enough, the evolved Musketeer, which was added in November 2024, does have a cape. Clash Royale severely overcomplicated Valkyrie in 2019. During the infamous simplification of melee ranges in July 2019, her range was increased by 0.2 of a tile to fit into one of the new categories. But for apparently no reason, her splash radius was increased by 0.4 of a tile. It seemed like this was for consistency reasons to remain in proportion with the range, but that wasn't the case. The only time you would have to increase the splash radius to keep the Valkyrie functioning was if the collision radius was increased, or if the splash radius was becoming less than the collision radius plus the range, and neither of those were happening. It took nearly 4 months to fully revert it back to 2 tiles. In the original trailer for quests, there was a quest involving Hog Rider that required you to get 10 hits on the tower, but this never made it into the game. The mini PEKKA's gender has been a bit unclear throughout the years. It's generally considered to be male because in its card trailer they referred to it using masculine pronouns, but the Clash of Clans official Facebook once referred to it with feminine pronouns. I know these are different games, but both games supposedly take place in the same universe. Although its Crown Tower damage has been adjusted several times, Fireball is one of only 2 long-term spells whose real damage has never been changed even once. For a while in the early days of Clash Royale, Bomb Tower was easily considered to be the worst card in the game, and apparently the reason it wasn't being buffed was because the person in charge of balance changes at the time simply didn't like it. The Giant has had the most reversions of balance changes in Clash Royale history. Its first 2 balance changes were in 2016, increasing its health and damage by 5%, and both of these were reverted before the end of the year. And in October 2023, its range was increased from medium to long, which was reverted 8 months later in June 2024. It did also get a health decrease in November 2018 and a health increase in February 2022, but it gained a few more hit points than it lost, so that one wasn't a full reversion. The Wizard, not counting the evolution, has only ever received 1 nerf, which happened in February 2016 during the beta period. Any other balance change applied to it over the years has only been a buff. When Inferno Tower was first released, a stun or freeze effect wouldn't reset its attack. It would interrupt it, but once the effect was over, it would continue destroying whatever it was targeting before at whatever power it was at. In 2020, goblins from a Goblin Hut spawned in waves of 1, with 3 being summoned once it was destroyed, but with multiple changes over the years, that was changed so that it would spawn waves of 3 but only summoned 1 once it was destroyed. Rocket is the most similar to how it was upon release compared to any other spell. The only one of its stats that's ever been changed is Crown Tower damage. Elixir Collector is the only card that can technically be played first, but cannot appear in your starting hand under normal circumstances. This was changed because what appears in your starting hand is a matter of RNG, and whether or not this card appeared in your starting hands made more of a difference in the outcome of the battle than with any other card. Barbarian Hut cost 7 Elixir for most of its life, but its cost was lowered to 6 in October 2022. However, did you know that before the game's beta launch, it was originally planned to only cost 6, as can be seen by early dev build gameplay? Early in the mirror's life, it still cost 1 more Elixir to play the card you previously played, but there was a glitch so that whenever you played the mirror, you would quickly earn back 1 Elixir. So effectively, you were paying the same price to mirror the card you just played. Unfortunately, it was still not very useful because the level of the card would be multiple levels lower for commons and rares. In the originally proposed Rage rework in December 2022, it was going to deal enough damage to kill goblins and knock back. This is why the Rage drops on the field instead of simply appearing like it used to. In June 2020, Swarm cards were being simplified to have a stagger deploy, so that they would take longer to maximize their damage output, but Skeleton Army was exempt from this standardization. Before July 2016, the Goblin Barrel used to deal impact damage, but it dealt just under the amount it needed to kill skeletons, which was the least damage dealt by any damage-dealing spell. The Baby Dragon is inspired from the dragon in Clash of Clans. Supercell actually wanted to put the dragon in Clash Royale, but the problem was that it was too big. The Baby Dragon was designed so that they could have some sort of dragon in the game. The freeze spell is one of the few cards in Clash Royale that didn't level up consistently with other cards. You see, every card's damage and health stats increased with each level, but freeze didn't have a health or damage stat, so the duration of the freeze went up with each level. So a level 13 freeze would be stronger against level 13 cards than a level 9 freeze would be against level 9 cards, which is not supposed to happen. Freeze was much stronger in top ladder than in challenges thanks to this, so it was eventually given a damage stat which would become the number that goes up with each level, and the duration of the freeze became fixed. From April through September 2019, the Witch left behind 3 skeletons when it died. She was underperforming, and they had wanted to make her more similar to the Night Witch, which left behind bats, so it seemed like an obvious way to go. They removed this in October because they wanted to take her in a completely new direction with a different rework, but when that rework got reverted, she never got those skeletons back. According to some promo images, it appears the prince was originally planned to be a rare card instead of epic. Contrary to popular belief, he was never a rare in a public build of the game at any point. The balloon has the shortest range in the game out of any troop at just 1/10 of a tile, which is 4/10 of a tile shorter than even skeletons. It also has the smallest collision radius at 3/10 of a tile. Giant Skeleton is the only card who has something that deals more damage to crown towers than troops. Lots of cards have crown tower reductions on their damage stats, but the Giant Skeleton's Death Bomb is the opposite, dealing twice as much damage to towers than regular troops or buildings. Lightning's damage was changed a couple of times in the past, but currently it deals about 1.5% more damage than it did upon release, which is only a difference of 16 at modern day tournament standard. Xbow's health has been changed a total of 4 times, but today it has the exact number of hit points than it did upon release. PEKKA is the only card that's ever had all 3 melee ranges. It started off with a melee short range, which was increased to melee long, then melee medium, then melee long again. The Golem and Golemite's death damage did not affect air units until October 2016. Despite this card being in the game for 10 months at this point, it wasn't labeled as a normal balance change, but rather as a bug fix. This was likely because the Ice Golem had been recently added and its Frost Nova didn't damage air units but did slow them down, making the bug significantly more obvious. The Royal Giant is a building targeting troops, so it can't hurt troops, but there is one exception, that being the Monk when its ability is active. 3 Musketeers have received the most elixir cost changes. They were changed from 10 to 9 initially, then years later it was raised back to 10, then lowered to 9 once again a few months later. Along with the Prince, the Dark Prince used to move faster than even a troop classified as very fast while charging. While a very fast troop moves at 2 tiles per second, a Dark Prince used to move at 2.3 tiles per second while charging. This was reduced to 2 tiles per second less than 1 month after its addition. When the poison spell was first added to Clash Royale, it had a slowness ability, but lost it within only a few months. However, a slowness ability was added years later in September 2021. These were pretty different from each other though. Originally, poison would slow down enemies' movement and hit speed by 20%, but nowadays it only slows down movement speed by 15%. Princess was one of the first 2 legendaries added, and during this time they had a 6th level that was locked behind a massive paywall. This level scaled improperly, giving a major advantage to the Princess if you could get this 6th level. After its first health nerf, only a level 6 Princess could survive max level arrows. This extra level was not in the game long though. Ice Wizard won the first balance pullback in 2018, which led to his slowdown duration being increased by half a second. The main interaction difference this caused was now when fighting himself, he would constantly remain slow instead of there being a split second where he's attacking at normal speed. When the Fire Spirits were reworked into a single unit, its splash radius was increased so much that it could actually fully counter a Goblin Barrel no matter how it was placed. As a result, when a Goblin Barrel went against a Fire Spirit user, they basically had no chance. During this entire 3-month period though, not a single log bay player finished in the top 200. Furnace has got to hold the record for the most unnecessary nerf of all time. In May 2020, its hit points were reduced by 16% despite a 28 to 30% win rate and extremely low use rate in competitive play. This was done thanks to the other spawners being too strong and to help keep the Earthquake Furnace interaction the same since Earthquake's damage to buildings was reduced, but it still doesn't really make sense. It's possible to complete the second tier of Guards Masteries very quickly by getting a super mini PEKKA to hit their shields. Even though they only have 256 HP at tournament standard, they can absorb as much damage as can be dealt to them in one hit before affecting the unshielded guard's HP. The super mini PEKKA deals over 100,000 damage per hit, which is pretty much a novelty number since no troop has more than just a couple thousand hit points, but this is the one situation where you can fully utilize that. For a brief period in 2016, Miner's deploy time was accidentally reduced to just 3/4 of a second. Sparky is the first card to not receive a balance change in its first year. Lava Hound is truly the only card in Clash Royale that can take no knockback in any circumstance. There are multiple ground targeting cards that can deal knockback to heavy troops and spells that can knock back flying units, but there is no card that breaks through knockback resistance that can also hit air units. Ice Spirit was released in July 2016, but its gender was only confirmed to be male in an explanation in the April 2022 balance changes, which also happens to be the set of balance changes where he got his first and only ever buff, not including evolution. There's been some speculation over the years on whether or not the bowler is a type of goblin, but thanks to the Goblin Queen's journey, it seemingly gives a clear answer to this theory. In this mode, only playing goblin-related cards can fill up your goblin meter and activate your Goblin Queen ability, and when you played bowler in this mode, it did neither. The log holds the record for the shortest time in Clash Royale history of a balance change reversion and the length between 2 separate balance changes. On March 13th, 2017, its rolling distance was decreased from 11.6 to 11.1 tiles, but there was a bug that came with this that made it so you couldn't play log on buildings. The bug couldn't be fixed until the next client update, so in the meantime its range was increased back to 11.6 tiles, and this was applied only hours later. Lumberjack didn't level up quite right originally. Upon release, a level 1 Lumberjack dropped a level 1 rage spell, and the rage spell it dropped only went up by 1 level for each level the Lumberjack was leveled up. This might sound fine, but this was wrong because epics and legendaries scaled differently. To be consistent, a tournament standard Lumberjack should have dropped a tournament standard rage, which was level 4 or 3 levels higher than the Jack. This was fixed 7 months after its release. Ice Golem's Frost Nova used to be a lot more impactful than it is today. There was a glitch with him originally where if you used something that killed the Ice Golem and hit another card and that other card was in the Frost Nova's radius, it would not take any damage. It made Ice Golem an amazing broken shield, but I guess it balanced out in a way because if something destroyed 2 Ice Golems, it would deal double damage to the troops inside the radius. Seth, the former community manager and game designer, personally said he wishes Mega Minion was a common card.
There are definitely some cards that I wish we could go back and change the rarity of. Like, I wish Mega Minion could be a common. I can't think of a card that would be better suited just to be a common.
Inferno Dragon used to be unlockable as early as Arena 4. This was earlier than any of the stun cards, even Zap, so if you got this card that low, you were set. Nowadays, you won't be able to get your hands on him until Arena 11. Graveyard is the first card that has RNG built into it. The places the skeletons appear in is always different, so even if you place it the exact same way every time, different things will happen. Elite Barbarians are the only card to have a different look in Touchdown than in regular matches. In this mode, they wear football helmets. Tornado deals the highest percentage of its damage to Crown Towers compared to any direct damage spell, sitting at 35%. For some reason, when every spell's Crown Tower damage was simplified to 30% in August 2020, Tornado was exempt. Champions cannot be mirrored, but they can be cloned, so mirroring a clone spell using a max level mirror on a champion actually allows you to get a level 16 champion, which is otherwise impossible to get. Until next year, probably. Electro Wizard was the first card to release with its own special challenge. This challenge worked much differently than challenges today. It worked almost exactly like a grand challenge where you had to get 12 wins to complete it, but if you got 3 losses, you had to start over. And there was no one-time rewards either. You simply got a better chest for each win you could only claim once you got 12 wins or 3 losses. The only difference between this and a regular grand challenge was that you had to use the Electro Wizard, and once you hit 12 wins, you got an Electro Wizard plus a 12-win grand challenge chest. 100 gems for just a legendary was an amazing deal back then, so some players farmed dozens of wins from this challenge to take advantage of the great deal. Goblin Gang originally had 6 total goblins in it, but in late 2017 this was reduced to 5. However, 5 years later in 2022, it was re-increased back to 6. Despite it having 5 goblins longer than it had 6, its card icon has always had 6 goblins in it. However, its card render has always had 5, and still has 5 as of this video. In November 2018, the community voted for the Dark Goblin to receive a damage increase, but it looks like the community voted wrong because the card became really strong after this and got a hit speed nerf a few months later. Upon release, the Battle Ray made the same noise a PEKKA did when connecting to its target. Executioner once received 7 changes within a 3-month period. He was planned to receive a major rework in September 2019, but it freaked the community out so much that the devs felt pressured to change the changes, and so they did. But this only made the Executioner worse, and so they went back and forth buffing and reworking it until they realized they were making everything worse unnecessarily and reverted him back to exactly how he was. Bats officially appeared in the balance changes before they were even playable in game. No, it wasn't just a behind-the-scenes pre-release adjustment, they actually announced it in the balance changes as if it was in the game already. Heal Spell was initially not included in Clash Royale because the developers thought it would promote unhealthy defensive gameplay, but changed their minds when some playtesting saw it was used primarily on offense. The Bandit is actually part of a scrapped concept of the Ghost. Not the Royal Ghost, just Ghost. Her dash was based on the original Ghost's main gimmick. The Night Witch's total death bag count has been every number from 0 through 4 at different points in her history. The Skeleton Barrel has the record for the longest time between a card being officially announced and revealed and time actually being playable in game. It was first revealed on June 11th, 2017, not officially playable until October 31st, 2017, and not officially released until November 17th. Flying Machine has only ever received 1 balance change in its history, but it's not something anyone ever asked for. Seth said in an interview one day that he was surprised no one had been asking for a Flying Machine nerf given how well it was performing.
Flying Machine is one of the highest win rates in challenges. It's a very strong card. It's used very consistently. Given how impactful it felt in the matchups, given that its stats are shown publicly as being very good, I'm just surprised that nobody ever, for any reason, has asked me to nerf that card.
Because there was no cause to nerf that card, he held off nerfing it for a while. However, it just kept doing better to the point where he eventually felt like he needed to take action anyway. Cannon card is the only way you can get a cloned building. As you probably know, you can't clone buildings. Likewise, you can't clone a cannon card in its building form. But if you clone a cannon card in troop form and that takes damage, you officially have a cloned building. Although Mega Knight seemingly jumps on troops, it actually doesn't go up on the Z-axis like other jumping troops, which is why ground-only targeting troops can attack it even when it's in the air. Zappies originally had a charging mechanic similar to Sparky, where its attack would completely reset if it was stunned. This meant in a Zappy versus Zappy battle, the one who got the first hit would win completely unscathed. Upon release, Barbarian Barrel actually had a Crown Tower reduction stat despite it not being physically possible to have it reach the tower. Pretty quickly, its range was increased just enough so it could reach a king tower when one tower was down and it was placed in the middle of the base. It was eventually reworked to have a much shorter range, and the crown tower reduction stat was completely taken away. Interestingly enough, it is possible to have a Barbarian Barrel hit the tower directly nowadays using a monk, and it deals 100% of its damage to the tower. So I guess technically Barbarian Barrel deals the highest percentage of damage to towers of any spell. Given these weird circumstances, if the devs re-implemented a crown tower damage reduction to the Barbarian Barrel today, it would actually be a buff since you can only hit your own tower. When Electro Giant was first released, a hunter was one of the worst counters to it. Even though it deals a lot of damage per hit, and typically high damage dealers are the best counters to Electro Giant, it originally counted each bullet as a separate attack, so if the hunter landed all 10 bullets, it would take 10 times the damage it was supposed to. Before it was buffed, Royal Ghost had the smallest area attack of any melee card at just 0.8 of a tile. It was so small that players who played with it in multiple matches were unaware it dealt splash damage at all. Magic Archer's attack has the smallest radius of any troop though, at just a quarter tile. The original design idea behind Rascals was that it was literally going to be a knight with 2 archers behind it, but due to some balancing concerns, they were changed into unique troops. Giant Snowball was struggling to make waves in its early days, so as a way to make it better without directly buffing it, they simply made several more cards no longer immune to knockback so that Snowball could be effective against them. There was an interesting bug with Royal Hogs that was fixed before they were released that had to do with True Red and True Blue. Sometimes they would run together in a square, but other times they would run in sort of an L formation. The L formation made it harder to efficiently counter. Nowadays, they always run in a square. Royal Recruits are the only card that have cost 3 different amounts of Elixir at different points in their history. They started off only costing 6, then 8, then eventually made their way down to 7. Besides a very small range simplification adjustment in 2019, Goblin Giant didn't receive its first nerf until 2024, after being in the game for over 5 years. Electro Dragon is one of the very few cards in Clash Royale history to never receive a buff. It only received 2 stat nerfs in a set of balance changes in 2018, then was never touched again, not including evolutions. Lots of card icons have been changed throughout the years, and typically the community does not like the changes, but the Ram Rider may have been the one exception. This was its card icon upon release, and it was commented on as being very bland and just not good looking. Due to popular demand, it was changed in only a few months, but some players got to keep the old one for a while as long as they didn't delete and reinstall the app. Wall breakers weren't officially added to Clash Royale until 2019, but they were referenced as early as 2016 via an in-game tip reading, "One day, wall breakers realized that they could do a lot more damage if they threw the bomb instead of sat beside it." This was talking about the Bomber, who was essentially a revamped version of the Wallbreaker from Clash of Clans. It made sense to revamp it, since Wallbreakers wouldn't work in Clash Royale since there are no walls, but I guess they decided to squeeze them in after all. And nowadays, you won't see that loading screen hint anymore. Earthquake is the only card in Clash Royale that can damage a Tesla while underground. This is a very specific one-on-one card interaction you really don't see with any other 2 cards. It was implemented in March 2020, seemingly for logical reasons, not balancing reasons, as Earthquake was performing better than Tesla when this was implemented, and the change literally only affected this one interaction. Goblin Cage was allegedly teased in the official Clash Royale 2018 recap video. When recapping the cards released that year, they showed a blank common card at the end and muttered something that some players think was Goblin Bruiser or Goblin Prison, both of which sound like alternative names to the Goblin Brawler and Goblin Cage. Goblin Cage was released 5 months later as a rare card, which was actually the 3rd card released since that video, suggesting it was possibly planned to come out earlier but was delayed. When Fisherman first came out, it was very bad, and one of the ways it was planned to get buffed was gaining the ability to pull in air units. However, this was cancelled due to it being too technically difficult to implement, as well as realizing that having a ground melee unit being able to attack air was just weird. Elixir Golem was released in 2019, but it was in the works years before that. In 2017, Elixir Golem was called the Elixir Monster and was scrapped due to its infinite multiply mechanic being deemed unhealthy for the game. We can also see its model posted in an April Fool's teaser image that same year. The Elixir Capture Game mode sparked the idea of a card giving Elixir to your opponent, which is when they finally decided to implement it. The Battle Healer was once rumored to be the same healer from Clash of Clans, just reworked to fit the game better, but according to a loading screen tip, it says Battle Healer's older sister can heal entire villages, heavily implying that the healer from Clash of Clans is not her, but her sister. Even if uninterrupted, a Firecracker will activate the King Tower in 2v2 just by regularly hitting the Princess Tower. This is the only troop that will do this. The original concept for Royal Delivery was a Bone Bomb, which involved a bomb that would explode, leaving behind 2 guards. The Heal Spirit received the biggest damage percentage increase in Clash Royale history. In March 2021, it was increased by 225%, beating out the October 2019 Witch change barely. Skeleton Dragons were released in June 2020. This was funny to many because the previous month was a heavy dragon-themed season, so it would have seemed more than fitting to release them then. They certainly didn't fit the theme of a Prince Happy Fantasy world. Electro Giant didn't level up properly when he was first released. His reflection damage didn't scale up per level, so no matter the level, it would only deal the damage of a level 6 zap. So when all cards were equal level, he actually worked best at the lowest level, unlike previous cards that leveled up incorrectly. Electro Spirit is the only card in Clash Royale history to never receive a balance change. It currently holds the record for the longest time a card went without getting a single balance change from release, going on 4+ years or about 1500 days as of this video. The previous card to hold this record was Flying Machine at 556 days. If this card doesn't get a balance change by May 9th, 2025, it will have beaten Flying Machine by 3-fold. The Cursed Hogs from the Mother Witch actually have a deploy time of 0.2 of a second, which makes it the shortest deploy time of any troop in Clash Royale. The Goblin Drill was actually supposed to be Clash Royale's first legendary building. However, it was revealed in a Q&A that it was changed to Epic because the last card released, Mother Witch, was legendary, and they didn't want to release 2 legendaries in a row. In April 2022, the Golden Knight's ability was activated more than 121 million times, which was actually the least of any champion. In June 2024, Skeleton King's health was silently decreased by 0.08%, and his damage was decreased by 0.48%, which is 2 hit points and 1 damage at tournament standard. It was never acknowledged in the patch notes. Although not released until October 2021, the Archer Queen has been found in multiple data mines from as early as 2017. Mighty Miner's name translates to many things in different languages. Some include Mega Miner, Superior Miner, and Pumped Up Miner. The Phoenix's egg is very unique in the sense that it's technically a troop but has a lifetime stat. This lifetime stat is different from a traditional lifetime stat, however, because with other cards with this stat when you damage them, it reduces their lifetime, but that's not the case here. No matter the damage dealt to it, as long as it's alive, it will survive 4.3 seconds. Monk has a very unique ability of being able to get hit by projectiles that aren't even focused on it directly. If you place something in between something shooting something else, the projectiles will go right through it, but if you use a Monk's ability against something focused on something else, it will reflect it anyway. There was a glitch with the Little Prince in July 2024 that allowed you to play 8 of them in a single deck. You're not supposed to have the same card in multiple slots at once or have more than one champion in a deck, so this really broke the game. If you used the ability, then every Little Prince on the map would use their ability, giving incredible value. This glitch for some reason seems to only work with Little Prince. It became so widespread that this 8 Little Prince deck reached the top deck list for a brief period. The Void spell's single target damage is 42% less than it was upon release. Once it was able to fully take out Sparky, now it can't even wipe out an Archer Queen. Goblin Machine has the highest recorded Grand Challenge usage rate in Clash Royale history, pushing upwards of 88%. This also helped in pushing Mirror to its highest recorded usage rate in any mode ever. Goblin Curse does very little damage and even less to Crown Towers. It does so little that it actually deals the same Crown Tower damage at multiple levels. Goblin Demolisher is the only troop with a traditional lifetime stat. Unlike the Phoenix Egg, damaging it in its lifetime phase does make it die quicker. According to some old preview gameplay of the Suspicious Bush, it was originally planned to have 3 goblins instead of 2. Goblinstein has a very special deployment. If you place it on the right center tile, the doctor will go to the left, but if you place it on the left center tile, the doctor will go right. And there you have it, one fact about every card in Clash Royale. I hope you learned something new from this. If you want to learn even more, check out the playlist in the description to see videos of me covering specific cards in depth. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time.